So we're down to chapter 8. And I'm planning to do this, and then I want to show you something secret, which we have to make a separate recording of because I've found a vulnerability, and it's important to us, but I just notified the developer today, so it would be kind of rude to publish it today. I'll give them like at least 30 days to lie to me and fail to fix it, and then they'll become homework. There's also, I suppose, a vanishingly small chance, like 1 in 1,000, that they'll actually do something about it, but I think that can be safely neglected. But it is traditional to give them 30 days. So we're talking about application development security. There are security features on the mobile device, but the fundamental problem in mobile devices, of course, is that they are likely to get stolen, the whole device, which you don't generally plan for normal apps like apps in a browser. So you make threat modeling is what you always have to start with. Amateurs entering security and new security researchers usually focus on one vulnerability because it's all they understand, and they can't understand why everyone isn't excited about their one vulnerability. But the real thing you have to do is threat modeling. There are always a million things that could go wrong, and you can't solve them all, so you have to figure out what's important to us. What are our assets? What are the realistic threat actors? Who's going to attack us? What are they going to try to do? And that's what we're going to put our money into stopping, not just every problem you can think of. And hopefully not just whatever problem is in the headlines in the magazine this week. That's stupid companies. Smart companies do this. They focus on what do we really need to protect, what features are involved, and what would be a logical plan to protect our real assets. And to be fair, these vulnerability reports I send out, some of them, I would sort of like to imagine the ones that like the top 10 banks actually went through this process, although I'm very skeptical, where they actually considered that what I'm reporting isn't important enough to be fixed. But in my experience, it seems to me far more likely that what's happening is they can't understand security at all. It's too much bother. They don't know how to do this. So they just look at the bank next to them and do whatever they're doing. And then they say, if we get hauled into court, we'll say we're just doing industry standard practice. And that's as far as their analysis goes, is just imitate the one next to them. I think that's what most people do, if they're in a sector where there are people next to them they can look at. There are a bunch of modeling platforms. Microsoft wrote one, and Trike is an open source one. And Octave came from CERT. And there's Digital and Pasta came from other groups. These guys all essentially do the same thing. There's different ways to lay it out. You diagram the app. You follow where all the information assets go. The password goes here, the credit card number goes here, and goes to this database, travels to this connection. Figure out what risks are threatening it, wherever you store it and wherever it passes through, and then you rank them into high probability and high impact and low probability and low impact, and figure out which risks are likely and are going to affect something that matters the most to you. This is the same thing you do for physical security in a building, or for national security, to protect a nation with your weapons and troops and stuff. This is what everybody's trying to do, essentially. So,
is there a threat modeling that you prefer?
I've never done any of these with these models. I've never been in the position of a company, of top of this kind of security officer at a company. So I cannot speak from experience. I know one similar activity is ISO 27000, and in education, it's called student learning outcomes. And the big thing there is you have to have a process whereby your top executives establish policies, then you have procedures and guidelines and standards that implement the policies, then you have to somehow measure what's really happening, and then you have to adjust your policies to improve adherence to your goals. And so that's why instead of what we always see, and of course what happened to college, we used to have classes and half the teachers do nothing, but the other half update their stuff and try to match some idea of what they should be teaching. And it's all pretty chaotic and nobody manages it. So now we actually have to fill out a bunch of forms where we report this information, and that's how it starts. So supposedly the college has a goal, every class has a goal, they measure how many students have achieved the goal, and then they do something to improve it. And here it's entirely fake and a farce, which is how it starts at colleges. You just make people fill out a bunch of forms without any understanding what they're doing, and you create a blizzard of paper that no one looks at. But after about 10 years, my sister went through this at a nursing school, and after about 10 years, they changed their whole school in good ways as a result of this process. They decided, something we could stand to do here, they decided that the problem with nurses and doctors, especially doctors, is they have no idea how to interact with people, and they're rude and abusive, and no one can understand them. And they wanted to put them through training to improve how they treated people, and they established a program for that. And they made it so each class has to have a videoed group activity where you record them. And each student has to have a goal, like to improve my ability to accept criticism or deliver criticism or lead or follow. And they would assess how well they were doing and whether they met that goal. And the older teachers absolutely refused to do this because it was too much work, so they forced them all into retirement. And all the new ones were used to it. And they actually built this into the curriculum. So it's but that's the that's the kind of thing that takes 10 years to happen. And I think it's the same with 27,000. The only reason anyone does it is because you're a military contractor or you're dealing with a company that requires it. And then you don't just make a product, you have a blizzard of paperwork showing that you actually planned the security features, you checked things, you checked all your suppliers, you assessed how secure it was, you improved it. So a ton of bureaucrats and paperwork flies around. And that's kind of what I'm thinking when I see this stuff. But that is how it goes. Big companies have planning. Some people have totally different theories. Like Facebook flies in the face of all this. They name the place Hacker Street. They say, forget it, move fast and break things as their motto. They don't do any of this planning. You never have to ask for permission to do something. They say, whatever you want, just do it. It's like, I'm going to make a new feature on Facebook, and it might break something else. So you say, I want to do it. Then you post it on some bulletin board for a week, where other developers can look at it and comment. And what people tell me is nobody ever looks at that thing. So it's just there for a week. Nobody looks at it. Then they roll it out. But they don't roll it out to the whole world. They roll it out to like one city and see if something horrible happens. And if nothing horrible happens in the week, they roll it out to a state. Then they roll it out to the whole world. And that way, all the developers have a good time. You have a good idea. In a couple of weeks, it can be out there doing your thing without ever going through some ponderous bureaucratic process. But most companies are the other way, where they try to control things more to avoid all the chaos. So here's an example. This, I think, might explain all the stupidity I see in mobile apps. In particular, mobile apps storing your password locally on the device. You wonder, why would anyone be stupid enough to do that? You could just store a cookie, which means nothing except authentication to my company. Why would I store a password on a mobile device? And the first thing that occurred to me is this. You already have web apps and servers and everything all working, and people using browsers, and you're told, we want to support mobile, but we're not going to give you enough budget to change anything. So you have to make it so mobile devices will come in as if they were coming in through the web app. And the easiest way to do that without changing anything, without adding any more servers or processes on the server side, would be for the mobile apps to just automatically type in the password. So the existing infrastructure thinks they've logged in with the password every time. Anyway, so we're going to talk about how this works for mobile apps. So here's an example. You got a banking app. It's got stuff going on up here. It's got a database and an authentication server. And people are coming in through browsers out here, coming in through the internet. And now you're going to add a mobile app. So you're going to have an app or a browser in the phone where they connect. They're going to come in through the Wi-Fi or the carrier network or something in through the internet, and they're going to connect to some of these services. So the question is, what additional risks do you have? And obviously now, whatever you stored on the smartphone might be stolen. The smartphone might be rooted or have malware on it. The attackers might be man-in-the-middling the network connections, and you should consider those things. And what they're going to settle for here is to give the mobile app only a portion of the functionality of the full app, which is certainly something you might do at first, but maybe all along. How much do people really need to do on their phones? It's an interesting issue. So there's threats. There are hacking tools for each of these protocols. You can hack into Bluetooth, 802.11. You can put a man in the browser. So you steal all the data in the browser. You can have malicious apps or on the phone, and you can have femtocells on the 3G and 4G network, as well as man-in-the-middles on the Wi-Fi network. The phone user might be your threat. They're going to reverse engineer the app, suck it off there and read the smally, jailbreak the device, put on goofy things. Thieves may steal the device, jailbreak it and steal everything through the USB port. So what could the user do? At the very least, they could steal your source code and encryption credentials from the app, reverse engineer the app. Maybe they could do other things. All my life I've heard this, and I've never heard of a single example proving it. When I was a kid, we had these things called telephones. They were a block of Bakelite with a rotary dial, and you weren't allowed to own them. You had to pay a monthly fee, and they said, you can't have your own phone. You might send a high voltage down the signal and destroy the whole phone network and end the world. So you have to rent all the devices from us. And I never heard of that ever happening, that some clown sent a high voltage down the phone line. But that was why we weren't allowed to own their phones. And that led to the current world where the carriers keep saying, you don't really own your phone. You can't really jailbreak your phone and put on any app you want because you might destroy the integrity of the network. But that's the game. You might ask, what could the user do to mess you up? So the owner, other people that have some kind of ownership in the device, like the people that own the App Store, they have a concern as people use apps and put up modified apps and comment on the apps and such. The publisher provides the user experience and access to the App Store. Your mobile carrier, as we've unfortunately seen, has a lot of stake in what you do. Their primary stake is to charge you extra money for services you could get for free, so they block the updates to prevent you from finding that out, and do other things to like trick you into a contract and overcharge you. That seems to be their main interest in you. And the other thing they want to do is snoop on everything you do and put targeted ads or sell your data to someone to make money. which we're all hearing a lot about these days. Then a device manufacturer, like they've got their brand at stake, and they'd like to keep you in their brand. So Samsung, for example, would like to hook you into the Samsung products, so you'll be more likely to buy more of them. By the way, I heard, it hasn't happened yet, but I read in the news that they're going to refurbish the Samsung 7s and sell them at a discount. So you could buy a used Samsung 7. That does not sound charming. I hope they cut the price a lot. Boy, I really don't know who would buy those.
Maybe people in Africa that look for cheap those.
If they're really cheap, yeah.
And it was just a bad battery. So if they do fix the battery problem.
It's an interesting issue. How much are you worried about your phone blowing up? It's like a psychological test. Anyway.
Well, there's like 10% of people that kept them even though they have the chance of blowing up. So
Oh, there you go. So they love them, yeah. Well, you know, when they had Katrina coming, a bunch of people didn't leave their home. They said the hurricane's going to blow the whole town down. They say, I'm not moving. Anyway, so then there's the App Store curators, of course. They've got their stake in things. I would like to know what the heck Amazon's stake in things is. Their store is like everything's 2 years out of date. It's like the Android store on your time machine. Well, I haven't looked at it lately, but I think it's still that way. Anyway, and then your company has an IT department, and they would like to control what you do with the device with the company data that goes on the device. So all these people want to stick their finger in your device experience for good reasons. There's people that, there's other stakeholders who run the apps. They control the credentials and the services you're connecting to on the servers. And your handset manufacturers put extra apps on the device, like the apps that track the performance of the network and such. And some of those are actually beneficial, and it lets them know whether they need to put more cell towers up in your neighborhood or something. And they can certainly put things on there that you cannot detect and that you cannot remove down in the firmware. And they have. So the App Store curators control a lot of this. They control packaging of apps, updating apps, removing apps, and the life cycle. So the problem come up when people have different goals. Like one owner would like to collect and store your personal information to do something that you don't want, like target ads, and you want to stop them, so you could jailbreak your device and fill it all with garbage maybe, and on you go. Now you've got a conflict, one of the many conflicts. So each stakeholder has assets, and they try to protect it. The end users might want to protect their privacy. The app publishers and the carrier want to collect your private information to increase their revenue. So there's a natural opposing goal there. Another issue is, what are you going to do when you don't have a network? We'll get to this next time. We're talking about payment apps. But payment apps store your credit card number in the cloud, and they generate one-use numbers, which you get from the cloud. And so now what happens if you want to pay with your phone, but you're not on the network? And the answer is they cache a few of these for use in that situation. But anyway, it's an issue. What kind of data should be available when you're not on the network? How are you going to protect the personal data you create? Usually, the data that people really care about is not the data apps create, it's the data they create by taking photographs and such. And not only is that stuff important and they don't want to lose it, it's often personal, they don't want the whole world to see it. And then there's sensor-based data, your GPS, your camera, your microphone, those are all picking up information too. And that's, again, you would like to know where that data is going and is it being encrypted and how much of it is leaking out to third parties. And there's identity data. You got persistent credentials like stored passwords. You got tokens like OAuth tokens, usernames, UUIDs, and other identifying numbers on your device. All these things indicate something about your identity, and if stolen, enable someone to impersonate you to some extent. And usernames. If you know someone's username and you can steal their phone, you can now reset their password because you can get the token that's emailed to their phone. The phone is almost always the second factor and two-factor authentication, and it's almost always the out-of-band retrieval mechanism for lost passwords. Almost everything will send you a code on your phone to let you back in. Although some of them will make you then answer a proving question like what city was your mother born in or something, which is probably not that hard to figure out anyway, but it's a little bit more than just getting the SMS. So what you have to do is you have to list the assets and the stakeholders and then consider all the bad things that might happen and try to plan for them. Figure out what the most likely and most dangerous things to happen are, and then put in mitigations. And this will run your secure software development lifecycle, which is a term I've heard Microsoft use. Microsoft claimed to switch to this a decade or more ago, and they're trying to make sure there are security reviews at every step of their development, and certainly Microsoft is the model of secure products in many ways these days. They're no longer the laughingstock they were 10 years ago. Now they often are more secure and more careful about these things than other companies. Anyway, got a few iClicker questions. So which one came from CERT? That one's dead? Well, that's no good, thank you. All right. Octave, isn't it? Yeah, it's Octave came from CERT. All right. Which stakeholder should be keeping malicious apps out of the Play Store? Well, most people would say it's the App Store curator. Their name is on it, and presumably they're the ones you'd blame if there's malware in there. That's what's currently happening, is the App Store screens them, if anybody does. Which stakeholder is most likely to jailbreak the device? All right, that's of course the end user who wants to put more apps on the device and perhaps steal copies of copyrighted things and so on. Nobody else particularly benefits from that. All right, who wants to control the corporate data on the phone? All right, that's of course the IT department using mobile device management. That's what they're doing. They're attempting to control what happens to the corporate data on that phone. What data type includes GPS coordinates? Remember when I was a kid, they would ask the computer, where is Captain Kirk? And they'd say he's in sickbay, and they had a map that showed where everybody was all the time. And I said, wow, that would be cool. And now we have it. So that's the sensor-based data. Everybody is voluntarily wearing these things and reporting back to a bunch of stakeholders, many of whom they do not even know about, everything they do all the time. It's amazing how little disasters come out of this. Anyway, all right, so here's some guidance. You do your threat modeling where you consider both the client and the server points of vulnerability that can be attacked, and then you make some decisions. Now, if you want to write apps that have the most features and run smoothly and have the look and feel of other apps, then you want to use the native API and the functions that are provided with the operating system that's put on the phone. The only thing annoying about that is your developers have to specialize. You have iOS developers, you have Android developers, and there used to be some ancient things like Windows phones and stuff that were another thing you'd have to support. So a lot of people prefer to dodge all that and make everything just like a web app and viewed through a browser, so it doesn't matter what phone you use, or make some kind of cross-platform framework to try to get the best of both worlds, where your designers do not have to work so hard to support many phones, and everyone gets some degree of a good experience. So the next thing is, how do you know that your app hasn't been modified? How do you know your OS hasn't been modified? Both are certainly possible. And so mobile device management, if you have it, provides some assurance of that. We talked about that in the previous chapter. There are management tools that attempt to tell if it's jailbroken, attempt to tell if they have modified the control app, but of course these things are not perfect. Although they could be very good if people tried harder, but in fact all the existing products, as far as I can tell, just do very simple things like look for Cydia to see if it's jailbroken and so on, when they could try a little harder. And then there's app integrity protection, which I know there are products for sale that will put multiple layers of checksums and obfuscation in the app, so it's almost impossible to reverse engineer and almost impossible to modify without getting caught and having it not work because it's broken. But most apps don't do any of that. In fact, I've tested, must be coming around 1,000 Android apps. I've never found a single one that implements any of this. The only one I know is the NFL app. The NFL app will not connect to the server if it's been modified at all. If I tried just downloading it, opening it with APK tool, repacking it, re-signing it with my signature, I didn't change anything, and as soon as it connects to the server, it refused to talk to them and said, your app must be updated before you can talk to our server. Because they got busted and publicly humiliated for sending plain text passwords, and they updated their app, and apparently they told their app team, make it really secure this time, and now they're far more secure than banking, financial apps, any other app I can find anywhere. All the rest should try being as cool as the NFL. Anyway, so like I said, integrity assurance, That's kind of an oxymoron in a fundamental sense. You're going to ask the modified device to tell you whether it's okay or not. And of course, they can modify it and then program it to lie about whether it's okay. But that's just an arms race. They ought to make it do something like verify the digital signature against a public key or something. That's the problem there. And mobile application management is something you can run if you do not want full mobile device management and you don't want to control the whole phone. You might just have mobile application management so that the apps that your company uses are provided from the company server. So it controls them and can maintain integrity and such. That might be one way to go. Reminds me of something I heard one of the big companies did about 6 years ago. They argued about bring your own device. And they said, we will pay you like $2,000 to buy a computer, and you can add your own money and buy any computer you want, and then you can use it for personal activities and for business activities, but you must put VMware on it, and the business activities must be done in the corporate VM, which must be at our standards. And that seemed like a pretty good model, where you have some reasonable compromise between letting people use what they want to use and controlling that their corporate work should be done in some environment where we can control it. Anyway, if you go to public apps in the App Store, you have to argue with the App Store about whether you can update it or not. And I can see why you might not want to do that. You might not want the whole world getting your app. You might just want your own corporate App Store, which you maintain, and then push things out through the mobile app management. That makes sense. So here's typical guidelines. Your web app, ultimately, all these things are sending signals back to, in JSON or something, or sending signals up to a web server. So all the usual stuff applies up here. You should have limits to what the mobile access can do, realize that they can't be trusted, have session timeout, haha, as if anybody ever did. Limit JavaScript, and we'll talk more about these as they go ahead. Storing sensitive data on the device. You should avoid it, although an amazing number of them don't. Then you can try putting it in various places on the device. And so I think these are coming up in detail. All right, so the OWASP top 10 is how to secure a web app on the server side. There's the usual stuff there like code injection and cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery and insecure direct object access and insecure sessions and insecure authentication, so you don't really know who people are or what they can do. And all those things apply just as much to mobile apps as they do to web apps. The walled garden should detect when people are coming in from a mobile app and then treat them differently, because you should be aware that people coming in on a mobile app are more likely to be a criminal having stolen the app than people using desktop computers, and you should be aware of that. You can reduce session timeout for mobile devices. I don't know why they keep saying this. I don't understand how anybody would ever do this, because it's so difficult to type your password in on the mobile device. It's always the opposite. The session is always much longer on the mobile device, and who cares what these security people say. You can also limit what JavaScript does. JavaScript has some dangerous methods like eval. I didn't know it had this one. This is great, where you can pass a command line command out of JavaScript. I know you can do it out of PHP. So that would be awesome. Take some user input and have eval. Then you got code injection vulnerability. And apparently square brackets do something like that. So there are alternative JavaScript subsets that you could use, which will remove the most dangerous JavaScript. And this is very much what Dan Kaminsky was recommending a couple years ago. He said, don't tell a developer, don't give them a method and then tell them not to use it. This is pointless. Instead, give them a language that does not have an awful self-destruct button for them to press. That does sound more practical, but it hasn't done much. Although that's how Microsoft secured their operating system. They modified C, they modified the C libraries, and they modified the C parameters, and made a custom version of C that doesn't have the functions that were leading to all the buffer overflows. And they said that it greatly improved their security. And they released it to the world a couple of years ago, so everybody else can use Microsoft's version of more secure C. And there are other ones out there too. And the end result is the old-fashioned aleph null buffer overflows went from like 70% of all attacks down to like 5% of all attacks over about 8 years. So they really did succeed in pretty much stamping out that type of vulnerability. And the square bracket notation is another version of this that lets you refer to properties. So you can refer to things, and if user input is in here, then you can, I think, input more brackets and ultimately take over the device, although I don't have the details. You can mask or tokenize sensitive data. This is something that in the project I gave you last week for Staples, I talked about last week and I finished it, I'll demonstrate it later. You can end up stealing a credit card number. This is the last part of that homework. You steal my credit card number from Staples, but you don't get the whole thing, because the Staples app does not let you see all the stored credit cards. All you see is the brand and the last 4 digits, which is an example of defense in depth. They don't, in fact, have a very secure app. It's very easy to hack in, but even if you do, they don't once you've authenticated, they still can steal some data from you, which is another layer of defense, and that's what you've got here. You should not be storing sensitive data on the device. It would, for example, if you want to just remember the fact that someone has logged in so that when they open up the app again tomorrow, they don't have to type in their password again, you could just put a cookie on the device. It's just a random number that does not mean anything, that isn't an encrypted version of anything. It's just a random number, and on your server you have a database that says this random number means this guy has logged in, and when they send that random number up to the server, you let them in that account. This means if someone steals their device and gets their PIN and gets in, then they can get into that one app, but they can't take the stolen password and take it to all the other places where you reuse that password. This is where you hit a sort of tragedy of the commons issue. It is clearly the case that everyone reuses passwords. I think 90% or more of everyone does it. The only people that don't are the ones that actually use password managers, and they are not thick on the ground. And yet it is every company can say, we put in our terms of service, you should use a unique password, so it's not our fault that you reuse that password for 20 other services, so we don't care that you steal the password out of our app and use it and get it somewhere else. And so it isn't directly the company's obligation, but at some point, you would think customers would get angry at companies that are losing their stuff. But I think security awareness is so poor that we're nowhere near that point. Anyway, so where you can put things. First, you just shouldn't store data on the phone. If you have to, put it in the security hardware, like the SE element. That's a good place to put it. If you can't do that, then you put it in the specialized secure platform storage, like the Keychain, which is provided by the operating system just for this purpose. Or you can store it in mobile databases or in the file system. And those are decreasing security as you go through those. But there's an awful lot of sensitive data. Phone calls, pictures, voicemails, GPS data, and then the persistent credentials that are used to log in on things. All these are things you would like to protect at various levels. The secure element is the best place to put this stuff, a special element intended specifically to store secret information. Considered very secure. The only attack I'm aware of against these is the one in San Francisco at Noisebridge. Jake Applebaum, back when he was a prominent figure, he sort of crawled into a hole and vanished these days. But he was part of a team of about 10 researchers that dissolved the SE element with acid until they could reach it with a microscopic needle and suck the head data off it. So that's the only attack I know that worked. And they said they had to destroy 100 of them before they managed to make it work once. So it's pretty extreme. But that's the only attack I know against an SE chip. It stores data in its own system. It's not accessible anywhere to the main processor, so no command sent to the processor can retrieve data off it. All it can do is send signals to it, asking it to do a cryptographic operation like take your key and decrypt this region of memory, which is what it does. You can't get the key, but it can do the decryption. And they lock out after a certain number of failed PIN attempts and so on. Here's another system. This is one of the card authentications. This is what Bart uses, MIFARE, that in fact stores a sort of token to keep track of who you are in the system. It does not store anything simple like the value of your ticket on here. It just stores your identifier, like a Active Directory security identifier, and then their servers can keep track of your money. But they did totally hack it. RSA, Rivon Rivest students at MIT totally hacked it a few years ago and went through the Boston subway system and found all kinds of vulnerabilities and made special gadgets to exploit them. And then they sent FBI agents to shut down their talk, and they eventually gave the talk elsewhere and it got out there. So there are known vulnerabilities in that system. MIFARE. Apple has a keychain. This is a database particularly intended to store secrets, so it's protected by a service that limits the access, and apps can only be accessed by the app that stored them, but the root user can read the keychain. And I know Ben's always trying to sneak onto my Mac because he can run something in the command line that will dump everything out of the keychain. And he came up and did it one time, and I saw all my passwords going by. That was pretty rude. So it's not fantastically secure to that attack, apparently. Yeah, that's the thing. Here's the thing. New open source hack extracts everything stored in the keychain. But you do have to be able to elevate to root users for it. But he didn't on mine. Well, I think he can do it even without that, which is really rude. I'd like to find out more details of that attack. Anyway, it's not surprising how much the root could do it. All right, Android has their version of it called KeyStore, which is the same thing, but it doesn't have a password. So an app must provide, anyway, apps need to provide some mechanism like this. This is interesting. I'm going to talk about how this is actually used incorrectly by an app later, but this is what you're supposed to do. Take a password from a user, then turn it into a key, then encrypt the data. That's one way to do it. And that's what PDKDF2 is. It is a way to derive a cryptographic key from a password, and all it is a bunch of rounds of hashing. All right, so your mobile database can be encrypted with a variety of extensions to your SQL or whatever you're using. Then another thing to be considered with is even data that appears to be innocent can compromise your identity. That's another problem. Images might have metadata. And another thing, people often can reconstruct things from images. There was a paper about a month ago about someone that took these pixelated images, like down to 4x4, and they can totally reconstruct the whole face from those images. Blurring things to anonymize them is not as great as it looks. And of course, you might have SQL injection if you have a SQL database. There's file system protection in the operating system. There's default encryption of everything. You can erase all the metadata from central point, and it's linked to a specific device. So it's not even that there's one universal key or anything. If you move files to another device, you won't be able to open them. And this is in all modern versions of iOS. So Apple encrypts your stuff a lot. This is why I've been finding people that store plain text credentials on iOS apps, and I have not been notifying them because although OWASP appears to not like it, as far as I can tell, it is not a real risk because the entire device is encrypted in a way that's hard to break into. I am not able to make a convincing business case of why it is really going to hurt your customers to put a plain text password on iOS. Can you? Yeah.
Not everyone uses a PIN. Some phones could just be you slide to unlock and you're in. So in that case.
Well, in that case, they could just open the app. Okay, then. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, but I mean, I'm not sure there's any way you can save those users.
If you store a session token, then you would be able to log in once, but you wouldn't have the plain text password.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a thought. Yep, you're right. Anyway, I'll think about it. Anyway, then Android. Files put in internal storage are in the data folder, special folder for each app, and they're limited to only the app that created them can access them, which is fine. You can put it in world-readable places like the SD card, or you can change the permissions to world-readable, but you shouldn't do that, of course, for private data. File system encryption is available in the operating system, but most devices do not have it turned on to save the battery. I think some modern devices claim to have it on. Does anybody have one that's encrypted? You know what? Do you have an Android that's encrypted?
Yeah, I think there's by default.
Which one?
I'm on the Nexus 6P.
The Nexus what?
6P.
XP?
6.
6. Good. And that's by default?
Yeah.
Good.
I think anything after Android 6.0 encrypts by default.
Oh, I don't think so. I think Google
can turn it off. But
yeah, but I think Google announced that and then they retracted it because many developers many device manufacturers did not agree.
manufacturers put their own skin on top, which can disable.
Right. So I think there are devices, a lot of devices are being sold without encryption turned on, I think. That's what I've been told in the news articles. Anyway, here's the issue, right? This came in 2015. Google said they were going to encrypt by default, but then they changed their mind. So you could encrypt by default, because it turns out a lot of people cannot figure out how to make the battery last. And this is a big issue. So,
Because it decrypts at boot, just like the Linux.
yeah, anyway, that's, for whatever reason, they keep saying they're going to encrypt them all by default like the iPhone, but it doesn't really happen because there's the whole same reason why Android has the market share. There are just hundreds of people developing Android devices, and Google can't really control them all. So some of them don't do it. All right, so which security measure is rarely used because it annoys the end user? The one they notice is session timeout. They have to keep having to type in their password. The rest of those you could conceal. Yeah.
I just have an interesting anecdote to share. So
Yeah.
I don't usually travel, but when I went to New York and I turned on my phone as soon as I landed, my Google Voice account logged me out. And it seems like what they did was because I live in California, but suddenly my session cookie is being used in New York, they logged me out without any message at all. So I was really surprised. It was kind of rude. But I basically had to log in again to be able to use it. So they have some kind of a session location protection where if you suddenly are in a different geographical area, very unusual, then they will just lock you out.
Yeah, and we'll get there more. This is the entire credit card system in America is protected entirely by this. Our credit cards have had zero security for decades. Every single person you use your credit card with can just copy the number, continue to suck money out of your account forever. until, of course, the new system, chip without pin. But the reason it worked was they did all the security on the server side. They watched for suspicious transactions like that and blocked them, and that's all the security we've had. And we've grown accustomed to not having any security at the endpoint. We'll be talking more about that next time. That's why they're moving toward mobile paying, which will be much more secure, but people don't trust it. Yeah.
I had the same thing, but it did give me a notification, but I think it was to my Gmail.
Yeah.
So another device that was logged into Gmail got the notification that I was logged in Texas. And is that
Right.
okay?
And the other thing is, I imagine that notification might go in the spam filter and stuff.
Makes sense. Yeah, I'll have to look for my notification because I wonder.
Yeah.
And it did. I had to log in again, so it did the same thing.
Yeah. Not a bad idea. See, the thing I ran into this a couple of years ago. The thing I noticed is more than half of the web services you use have a logout button, and when you hit that logout button, it does not invalidate the sessions that are using your cookie. Even the cookie out of that browser continues to work forever. So that's the opposite of this. There is no way to even tell it I want to end the sessions. Anyway, all right. And, okay, which one involves avoiding square brackets? You know, it's painfully obvious that the vast majority of companies and consumers are just baffled by all of this and have no idea what's going on with their security. All right, and so that's, of course, the secure JavaScript subset. Good, okay. And where's the safest place to store your data? All right, and that's, of course, the security hardware, like the SE element. Secure element, that's what it's for, a special chip that is extremely difficult to steal the data off of. Where's the least secure place to put your data? All right, and that's, of course, the SD card, removable like a floppy disk, world readable, not intended at all for private data. Where's the most secure place a banking app can store an encryption key on an iPhone? And that's right, you can store it in the keychain, but you can't put it in the SE card because only Apple can do that. They will not let any third-party apps put anything in SE. Yeah?
Since iOS 9 you can.
iOS 9 does you.
Yes, but it can be only an elliptic curve-based key. And you can technically store it. You have to generate it inside of the security hardware. And
okay.
You can use it for decryption, and the private key will never leave the security hardware.
Good. I'm glad you reminded me of that. I won't grade this one. There's no single right answer. But I think you're right.
But technically, if you want to store it, you can't actually put it in. You have to generate it inside of it, which is the only secure way that you could actually have it. Because if it's leaked, if it's already outside of it and you want to put it in, the security feature will be gone. So the way that you do it is you have to generate it inside of the security hardware.
Oh, so you generate a new key in the hardware and you store it elsewhere, encrypted with that key.
No, the key will be stored in the security hardware.
But you don't generate it. You don't put it in. It generates its own key, or you put the key in there.
You generate the key using an API, but you never get a handle of it.
Oh, you never see the key.
Right.
Ah,
For security reasons.
I see, but that's the way I phrased the question. A is probably the best answer, but I don't think I'll push it because it's certainly not what's in the book or my notes. All right, well, what is it? It's just about 7. Let's pick up at 7:10, and we'll do some more of this, and then I have a couple of demos. All right, well, I guess we can pick up again. So you do have to authenticate to the mobile services. You could just send a password up there, and as you know, there is OAuth and SAML, which make it possible to use tokens that limit your privileges, and you don't have to handle the password directly. Just very few people bother to use them, like so many of these things. Many people have developed apps that use existing identifiers. This is like the college used to use social security numbers to identify students, and of course we came to regret that, just like everybody else did. You really shouldn't use an identifier that has meaning outside your context. If you give them their own, make up their own number. If you use something else like the phone number or the MAC address, you're going to be sorry. For example, when people sell their phone, and now there's a different person tied to the same number, you'll wish you hadn't used that number for the identifier. in addition to you taking responsibility for handling another number that might hurt the user. And these things are often easily found anyway. That's what happened. We've dumped out the IMEI numbers for Apple devices or some similar number. I say cached credentials should have a timeout, but that's inconvenient and rarely done. You should be using TLS, of course, for communications. If you directly go to HTTPS and do not go to HTTP first and then get redirected with something like a 302, then you're resistant to all man-in-the-middle attacks, even SSL strip, because the original connection will not be formed unless you can pass the certificate validation, if you actually validate certificates, which an amazing number of apps do not. So it's even better is to use certificate pinning. The app does not have to settle for the operating system or the browser's list of trusted certificate authorities. It could go beyond that. You could know the serial number of the exact certificate you have. Now that would be annoying because every time your certificate expires and you renew it, you'll have to update your app. But what's more practical and what most people do is they put in a cryptographic number that proves the identity of the certificate authority. And then all you're saying is, I'm going to always have my app signed by VeriSign or some other certificate authority. And then if you renew it with the same certificate authority and your old app will keep working. And again, that stops a lot of the attacks because there are people who are able to get a valid certificate authority's signature and use it to man-in-the-middle things, but they can't get an arbitrary certificate authority's signature. They're more likely to get one from, say, a foreign nation or a smaller provider. So, yeah.
If you only validate the certificate authority, is that still called certificate pinning?
Yes, that's one version of it. Yes, they call it that's the recommended version. In fact, there's an article from OWASP about it, with there's 3 or 4 versions of it, and that still counts because now an arbitrary stolen certificate is not as likely to work. It doesn't. It's the you could argue it's not as perfect because they could steal a certificate authority from that certificate, but it's still considered certificate pinning because it's more than just having a certificate come from a trusted authority. Yeah.
Because what I heard before was that the certificate authorities basically sell the private keys for the root certificates.
They do.
So in that case, the certificate pinning would not protect against that kind of an attack.
It would mean that you actually have to compromise your certificate authority, and now you can choose one you trust. Yes, if the people you bought your certificate from betray you, you're shot. Unless you pin it to use.
Verify the actual certificate.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That might help. You're right. But I don't know anybody that's really regarding that as a threat model. I think most people are not concerned. I'm not aware of criminals actually using American companies' stolen root certificates. Corporations buy them, and law enforcement gets them to do man-in-the-middle attacks to hunt for criminals. And the main thing you're worried about is China. The government of China totally puts themselves in the middle and signs stuff from China. So that's your main issue. Even making sure it's signed from the right country would probably be enough to stop the realistic threat that people are worried about. Anyway, then you got WebView. WebView is the software that draws the web pages in your browser, and unfortunately, it caches things, and it might cache something sensitive. And there's a cookie database that could be used. You can steal cookies from it. You can limit what's cached. You can disable autocomplete in your HTML so that it will not fill it in with cached data. You can set a header on the server for some of your pages telling the browser not to cache it, although you have no way to verify that really happens. That hopefully happens. There's a clear cache method you can execute, which will delete files stored locally, but it doesn't work very well. On Android, you have to delete them one by one by the file name. The global delete fails, which is the kind of thing, it reminds me of hard drive security. When you get rid of a hard drive, you'd like to wipe it. And there is a firmware wipe command on many hard drives, but you have no way to verify that it happened because after that you lose contact with the device. And a person I know that works at one of the companies that destroys data for a living says that thing fails very often. They find data on things that have been supposedly securely wiped. So a much better procedure is to find some way to wipe it that you can go back and verify it's really wiped. There was a fun talk given by the guy that wrote Linux, many Ubuntu Linux books, Kyle Rankin, and he would get cloud servers like at Amazon and use them for corporate data, and then he'd say, when you're done with a cloud server, how do you wipe it? If you just cancel it, it goes back to Amazon, and Amazon, in fact, was caught. When E2C was new, they actually gave the hard drive space to the next person without wiping it, and people would install a forensic tool and find the last company's data on their cloud server. So if you want to be sure that doesn't happen, how do you do it? And he had a very cool technique of having a cloud Linux server and then setting a part of the operating system in RAM and some of the utilities in RAM, so he could run from RAM entirely and wipe the hard disk and verify it was wiped and then disconnect. which was cool. That's what you have to do. The only way you can really like sign a document and say, yes, I made sure that we didn't leak the data from that cloud machine. Anyway, so there's cache mitigations again. You can have a session timeout, which would sure be nice, so that even if someone steals the cookies, they won't work forever. Some banking apps do this. After 10 minutes of inactivity, they hang up on you, which does provide some protection if someone's going to steal your cookie and try to use it later. There are ways to clear cookies from the server in the client, so that would be a good thing to do now and then. And then, of course, there's WebView and JavaScript bridges. Remember that you talked about these before. There are some dangerous JavaScript methods that let you do things you shouldn't be able to do. So there are some, if you must use these JavaScript bridges, there are methods to avoid to make them safer. Although I don't think there are prepackaged frameworks of safer versions of them, which might be what would be better. And if you use a custom URI scheme, of course, we talked about this like Skype did, then you're going to be receiving methods from other apps, so you should be aware that you need to input, validate, and output, and code everything, because you may be receiving malicious intents. There's a clipboard available. You can copy things into the clipboard, and once you do, that's stored somewhere in the file system, in the memory, and you don't know where that is, and that's not very safe. It can be pasted anywhere. That's the whole point of it. So you might want to turn off the clipboard, disable copy and paste, so people aren't copying passwords and putting them in something else. Some people started doing this, and people got very angry that were using certain password managers. There are password managers like KeePass, open source ones, that just expose the password, and then you have to copy and paste it into the field. And when they disabled copy and paste, people felt like they were doing it cruelly to make us quit using password managers. So you can't win for losing, you know. And there are logs, of course. An amazing number of people put sensitive things in the logs. And the logs is available to every app, of course. That's the point of them. You shouldn't have anything sensitive in there. And there have been many, many mistakes where people do put sensitive data in the logs. You've seen that in the homework. For iOS, there's a keyboard cache, which stores key presses. And that is so it can do that infamous autocomplete that everyone hates about iOS, where you're trying to type something and it changes your words into other words. Therefore, apparently, I don't know this, apparently it can learn like your password, and now when you start typing, it'll complete and put your password in there. So you can reset the dictionary to clear the stuff out of there. And apparently, sometimes you have to code for ASLR. It's not always on for every app. You have to encrypt with PIE, compile with PIE. And if you're going to make a custom URI scheme, like Skype did, you can use something called OpenURL instead of handle OpenURL, which will be better. And again, you have to validate the parameters that come in with these custom schemes because they might be attacks. You should have Stack Protector. This is canary-based stack smashing protection, just like Ubuntu, so that at the end of every stack frame, there is a number that is hard to deduce, and it checks to make sure that number has not been modified, which would prevent the old-fashioned buffer overflows. And there's a thing called automatic reference counting, which sounds pretty awesome. This would automatically delete things you're not using anymore. This is one of the amazing things about Microsoft. If you boot up even Windows 10, you launch an app that you used to use, and it says, a DIL file is gone. I can't find xyz743.dil, the way Windows 98 used to. This is because when you uninstall software, there are libraries that are no longer used. And Microsoft has no way to know if they're used or not. So they'll pop up a box, well, I'm deleting this, so I delete these 10 libraries that came with it or not. And how are you supposed to know if one of your other apps is using that library? And no one ever knows, so they click random things there, and pretty soon the library they need is gone. Linux, as usual, solved this problem in 1970. They have a thing called the link count. If you're referring to something, there's a link count. It's right there in ls-l. So if 2 files are using it, the link count is 2. If 3 files are using it, the link count is 3. And only when the link count goes to 0 does it delete it. It just keeps track for every file of whether you're using it or not. And when you're not using it anymore, it deletes it. Microsoft didn't get the memo yet. So anyway, however, Android is based on Linux, and they did get the memo. So this is a reference, this is a level of the same thing up to the level of C, where instead of use after free, vulnerabilities is a big issue. You allocate some memory, then you forget to free it. And so there's a handle pointing to a part of RAM that's not used, and you can use it to write into RAM and take over the device. Or you double free, and that can lead to a similar disaster. So there's this automatic freeing thing, where it will just have like a garbage collection routine that automatically frees up the things you're not using anymore, which sounds pretty good. Apparently, it's dangerous to turn on. It'll break some apps. But it does sound like a pretty clever trick to limit use after free vulnerabilities. And in the chart I saw from Microsoft, I mentioned it used to be like 70% of the vulns were buffer overflows, and now it's down to 5%. But the thing that came up and took over was dangling pointers, which is what this is. Dangling pointers is now the most common, most dangerous vulnerability. So some kind of automatic protection against dangling pointers is probably a really good idea. And then there's those application screenshots. When you close an app, it goes whoop, and when you open it, it goes boom, and it has to store an image to do that, and the image might have sensitive data on it. So it is like a keylogger logging every screen that you shrink and expand. It's just amazing. When I first heard about this, I had to laugh. You've got to be kidding. This is like, it's storing, and it had a cache of these, and you can steal them. In one version of iOS, it's pretty common. So anyway, it's an issue. There's apparently, someone's telling me they have this working. There's a splash screen you can turn on that will prevent this. Where it actually shows some bland screen with no information in it, and that's all you'll see in the Zoom picture. Yeah?
Yeah, and an app like Signal does that. So basically,
What's that?
The Signal app, which is used for encrypted.
The Signal, yeah,
they have this feature where if you go to background, then they will just have the splash screen, so you can.
That makes sense, really. Yeah. Anyway, then Android, you can just do traditional secure coding. Google recommends Java rather than C++, which is cool because C++, of course, gets compiled down to the old-fashioned machine code, and you can make all the mistakes, off by one, buffer overflow, and everything, whereas Java runs in the Java virtual machine, and you really don't have an opportunity to control it in that detail, so you can't make those mistakes. The only person that can make those mistakes is the people that wrote the JVM. It's just a higher-level language, and you don't get an opportunity to make those low-level mistakes. You have to tell it to use PIE for position-independent executables if you wanted to have address space layout randomization, and you do, because that's a very strong defense against buffer overflows and a variety of other memory corruptions. And intents are pretty dangerous. Intents are signals sent from one app to another app, and they can contain special characters and command injections, so you have to input validate them. You should limit what you accept intents from, and be aware that broadcast intents, of course, go to every app on the phone, so you shouldn't be sending anything private in them, just like the log. And the NFC tags are intrinsically dangerous. You can't tell what's on them. You can't tell if they've been modified. So assume that data from them is untrusted and validate it. And when you make tags, you should write protect them so someone doesn't maliciously alter them. All right, which one can make your app more secure than a browser? It would be nice if anybody bothered to use it. It's, again, something I have never seen in the wild. There must be somebody using these things, but I sure don't come across them. All right, that's certificate pinning. Then your app would be more secure than the browser. The browser will trust anybody in the trusted root authorities, but your app could be smarter than that and be pinned. Yeah?
So Chrome has certificate pinning, right?
Chrome,
For the top
I think Chrome at least knows whether they should be secure. I'm not sure it knows what the certificate authority should be. It might know that too, but it does know that they should be HTTPS. So if you go and type in yahoo.com, it doesn't attempt to connect to HTTP yahoo.com. It goes directly to HTTPS. But I don't know if they also included a certificate. They might not. I don't know.
They do nowadays.
That would be awesome, but it does mean they're going to have to keep that up to date as people buy a new certificate.
But apparently in Iran, they were doing some certificate stuff, and that
Oh, they were.
apparently this program would not work in the real world, but it would work in Iran, and Google looked at it and said, no, they got the certificate authority, and that's when they started moving the penny.
Oh, this is a real attack.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, great. If you find an article, send it to me. I'd like to know. Because I've heard of it as a theoretical attack, but I wasn't aware of real cases. Okay, good. That explains why they've been pushing it. Good. All right, which item will leak the password out of a browser? In general, when you find someone taking real action to stop something, it probably means that there was a real attack, even though the attack may not have become public. Anyway. All right, and that is the cache. All right. That's one of many side channels. All right, where's the safest place to put a password on that list? All right, and the only good place on that list is HTTPS. That's an okay place to put a password. All right. All the rest of those are pretty terrible places to put a password. Which one can leak secrets and is used just to make it prettier? Of course, to be fair, being pretty is actually very important. Customers will like it and pay more money for it and everything else. So you can't just say, who cares how it looks? That's not a realistic attitude to take. I'll quit at 25. All right, and that is the screenshots. The screenshots is part of what makes iPhones so beautiful and fun to use. So lowering the security a little bit is worth it in real terms, probably. So which one improves C, but you don't need it for Java? I was thinking of ASLR, but this automatic reference counting sounds pretty good too. Yeah.
The automatic reference counting is for Objective-C, not for C.
Objective-C.
It's only for Objective-C.
Not C. Good. Okay, fair enough. So it is ASLR. All right, good. So I have two demos. One is public, and one cannot be made public for a month or two. So this is the one I promised you last week, and I think I demonstrated it to another class, but not this class. This is the Staples Android app. So the point is, I've notified them 4 months ago, and they don't care. They promised to fix it and then just ignored my further questions. So now they're homework. So the Staples app is a fine example of how not to do things. So I've got Staples on here, and I think I have logged into an account. My card is empty, but I'm pretty sure I'm logged in, which I would find somewhere there, here, with the head. Okay, there we are. I'm logged in with testsam@mailinator.com. So somehow it remembers who I am. I made some test account. So let's take a look and see what I've got. If I do ADB shell, and then CD data, and then ls, I see all these. Every app has its own directory in here. So let's do ls pipe grep cap. I don't know why I do this. No one ever seems to use capital letters in apps. I always skip the first letter thinking they might capitalize the S, but that never seems to happen. So here's app.staples. So let's go in there. This is the, now let me remind you, ls-l. Every one of these is owned by somebody different. These are the user accounts for every app. And I always have many of them because I test dozens and hundreds of apps on my phone. So Staples has its own identity, and only that user is allowed to go to the data in here. That's how it protects the other apps from reading your data. So let's go in there, app.staples. Okay. In here you have some data, and I'll always see the same stuff in here. One thing I often see is shared preferences. So let's just do grep minus insensitive recursive for password. This is one thing I often do to look for stored data. There's a variety of tricks, but the simplest one is to just use grep looking for the word password somewhere. And if you're lucky, they'll just have something called password that they've stored on the phone. And indeed, Staples has this thing called encrypted password. So the question is, how sleazy is their encryption? Every time I see this, I wonder whether it's really good or bad. At least it's not just right there in plain text. The password is this garbage right here. That's a base 64 encoded string. So I might as well leave here and just fix it. You can use as much online tools as I can do it, but I'll just use Python, import. Actually, I just learned I don't need to do this. I can just set this equal to that. Okay, and then all these things are right here. You can just do AD code base 64. I just learned this like a couple days ago. There. So now it looks like a mess. It's not readable ASCII, so I better encode it with hex. Okay, and it turns into that garbage in hex. That mess is apparently the password. So it looks like it might be secure, and you wonder how it works. So the way to test it is very simple. Since they are storing a password locally in some encrypted form, I can pretty much assume they're idiots because they should never have done this. It should just be a cookie. And at very least, if they needed to store a password, it should be in the Android keychain. It shouldn't just be sitting there in the file system. If it is, they're pretty much idiots. So if they're idiots, you ask how stupid could they be? And one obvious stupid mistake is to use ECB mode. And so if you suspect that, you can sign out and make a new account. And I'll make it test demo1@mailinator.com. And you put in this password. 3456781234567812345678123456778. 32 Qs, and they won't take that. They want you to have numbers and capital letter in there, so I add that at the end. So I have 32 identical characters in there. And if you remember the web development class, well, web hacking class last semester is where I learned how to do this. So now that I've done that, I can now, let's get out of here and go back on the phone and go data. Okay, and grep minus IR password dot. Okay, so now I've got the new encrypted password. And what I want to show you is that it is repeating. Now, if I let A equals this junk, it's not trivially repeating. You don't see the BX come around again. But if you decode it from base 64 and then encode it with hex to see the raw hexadecimal, then it is repeating, and you just need to change the window size, and there it is. So so what's going on here, this 057 up to that 5 is the encryption of the first 16 queues. Then this 57 up to that 5 is the next 16 queues, and this junk here is the 123A. This is called electronic codebook mode, and it's one of the many big mistakes you make in encryption. And this is what happens when someone attempts to encrypt something and they don't actually know what they're doing at all. They just read something like a math book and do the simplest form of encryption without understanding that it's not good enough. So the point of this thing is now you can find the password. And the way you do it, of course, so this is how these techniques work together. So you do this. This shows that you have a serious problem with the encryption. You still don't necessarily know what routine they're using or what they're using for a password, but you can assume from the number of mistakes they've made so far that they've done something stupid, and that is indeed the case. If you go in and suck the thing off the phone and then take it apart with APK tools so you can see the source code, you will find that now I already know that it's going to store something in the log called encrypted passwords. You can search for the string encrypted password. It saves you a lot of time hunting where it might be. And you find this is the thing that actually writes it into the shared preferences editor, which is what puts things in that shared prefs folder. So this is the routine that put the encrypted password in that file. And it calls a thing called GU and a thing called M. And you can go find them. And the GU, here's E, here's the GU. The GU is what builds the encryption string. And it is just the brand of the device, the name of the device, the model, the serial number, and the name of the package, which by the way is app.staples. And you can see it. What I did was I put it in, I modified the code to put it in the log down here. There's also this thing called extra salt and then SHA-1. So you put in a Trojan that will put it in the log, and I've already got that in here. So if I leave this and I examine the log, there it is. This is the encryption string. Extra salt, it adds here, because as if they only, the salt is supposed to be a random value. This is just amazing, and the one I'm going to show you is even worse. It's like, there's a time when the Beatles got tablas, which are Indian drums, and they made a song with tablas, and then they asked Ravi Shankar, what do you think? And he said, it's like little children just pounding out, don't even understand what it's supposed to sound like. I hate it, you guys are idiots. And that's what they're doing with encryption. This is like someone picks up a guitar and uses it to hammer a nail in. This is not what you're supposed to do, just take a fixed value and call it a salt. But anyway, extra salt, here's the name of the brand, here's the specifics of my device with the resolution, here's the serial number, which comes out unknown on Genymotion. They don't happen to implement a serial number. Here's the name of the app. That's the encryption key. That's the whole thing. Yeah?
What encryption algorithm is it used for?
AES. They just use a fixed key, and what they do is they run this through SHA-1 and take the first 128 bits, and that's the key. So what you do is you put that app on, get the encryption key, which is always the same thing I just showed you. Then you can just go hash it with SHA-1. And when you do, you get a 160-bit hash. You take the first 128 bits of that, and that is the AES key. And now you can just go to an online AES encryptor is one simple way to do it. You put in the password that you used. In plain text, you put in ECB mode, there's the key, and when you decrypt it, you get the same hex values that you saw before. So this proves that you can do it. And so if you do this, it's good for you. It's the last project in this class so far, and for extra credit, steal my credit card number. I made another account at Staples on a different device, and I put a credit card number in it. Now, so here is the stored data in that shared preferences file off my other device. And here's the answer. I wondered how to get these things, and I checked, I Googled around. There's a thing called get prop you can run at the Android command prompt, and it just lists all the properties on your device. And I picked just the ones you need: product brand, product device, product model, product serial. That's information. Yeah?
Is that also an Android manifest?
It might be. I don't know. I don't think so, because the Android manifest is only for the app, and this is for the device. So it would be somewhere in the OS, I guess, like whatever they use for a registry or something. But anyway, I just Googled for it, and that command, if you just give that command with no arguments, it'll print like 30 lines of stuff. So it gives you all the parameters of your device. Anyway, so break into my account and steal my credit card. And so that's it for this one. And now I want to show you the secret one. So Nick, I imagine you can hear me. So break the recording. Don't publish this part right away or someone might get mad at me. He's in the other room controlling these recordings. And I warned him I was going to do this. So.